A new major expansion is coming to the Lord of the Rings Online, Wolves of Mordor, which will include a brand new feature called Survival Instincts. This new progression path that is active in the expansion's region gives players new, unique tools and abilities. New additions and a modified gameplay loop sound exciting. I mean, how many levels has it been since classes have unlocked their last ability? However, looking more broadly at LOTRO's design over the years, I have to admit that I actually feel more concern rather than excitement around this feature. I do like that the developers are willing to experiment with the progression loop in the game and are trying to keep some freshness with the gameplay, but Survival Instincts raises immediate red flags. Instead of addressing some of the foundational issues of LOTRO's progression, such as the virtue system, this is like a temporary expansion-specific power surge over already bloated systems. So why does this feature give me so much pause, and why won't it fix LOTRO's long-term progression problems? We have to first look at a concept commonly referred to as borrowed power, which World of Warcraft became infamous for. More specifically, for years, WoW introduced expansion-specific progression systems like artifact weapons or covenants, where you spend an entire expansion grinding for amazing new abilities, only for the game to strip them away the moment the next expansion launches just to run a new treadmill. Now, Survival Instincts isn't an exact clone of WoW's borrowed power systems, but it shares the same underlying design principles. With Survival Instincts, they are only active while you are physically within the new Wolves of Mordor regions. Functionally, though, the result is quite similar to borrowed powers. Once the game inevitably moves on to the next major region in a future update, these abilities will essentially cease to exist there. Sure, they will be there for when you go back, but the most immediate glaring issue with the system is the mechanical whiplash it is going to create right now. LOTRO is a massive game that thrives on its wide variety of content. Even the developers just recently talked about this in one of their streams. But with Survival Instincts, think about how we actually play at the level cap. What happens when your kinship wants to run an older instance scaled up to the cap for a change of pace? What happens when you want to run a featured instance even? And then what about delvings or missions that take place in older zones? You are going to be constantly bouncing back and forth. One minute you are in Wolves of Mordor with a toolkit full of cool new abilities and a modified gameplay loop, and the next you step into a mission and they are completely deactivated? So having your rotation disrupted based purely on what geographic zone you happen to be standing in is incredibly jarring. It inherently disrupts class flow, and I know I would not look forward to finally getting a powerful new Survival Instincts tool just to want to run an old delving somewhere else. It would feel like you left half of your character back with the wolves. All that said, it is possible that the developers are accounting for some of this, but based on the early info, I don't really have my hopes too high on that. Aside from the similarities to borrowed powers, taking a step back and looking at the broader picture of the game right now, Survival Instincts feel like a band-aid applied to a much deeper wound. LOTRO's fundamental progression structure leads both to little class progression late in the game and the exhausting, endless feeling in-game grind. With the step back, let's look at the sheer amount of vertical progression currently in the game. First, you have plain old character level. Perhaps this is the simplest of all. It gives an idea of your general place in the game relative to the world and enemies. Second, you have the core class trait system, which is now directly tied to level but stops progressing at level 140 compared to the current cap of 160. On top of that, the actual traits are still in the same format as Helm's Deep when they were introduced at the level cap of 95, a grand total of 13 years ago. Next up, perhaps the biggest grind in all of LOTRO is the virtue system. Virtue traits progress per character, and in short, there are a lot of them and a lot of levels. This is a wonderful way to boost the stats of your character, but the levels just keep going up with major updates. Then there's the legendary item system, which does have a grace period when a new level cap releases, but you do want to replace all of your traceries with every level cap, and that includes enhancements as well. More generally, with every level cap and major update, there is vertical progression in gear item level as well as essences. Essentially what I'm getting at is that when you reach the level cap, you have this massive checklist for progression, some temporary like gear and some more permanent like virtues. And with all that, LOTRO's progression is built almost entirely around endless vertical treadmills. For much of the player base, this is quite overwhelming and it naturally leads to progression fatigue. You spend months finally reaching the top of the mountain and getting your character new gear only to discover you actually should be getting your virtues leveled up. Then the next update raises the virtue cap higher and introduces better gear, forcing you to start the exact same climb all over again. And this is where my biggest concern with survival instincts comes into play. Introducing a new regionally locked progression system on top of this existing grind doesn't alleviate the core problem of progression fatigue. It doesn't replace the gear and essence grind, it doesn't streamline legendary items, and it doesn't fix the virtue system. Instead, it just adds another chore onto an already bloated checklist. If survival instincts is balanced in a way where you need these regional powers to comfortably survive or complete the content in Wolves of Mordor, then it also isn't just an optional fun side activity, it becomes a requirement, kind of like the Light of Arendelle system the developers were trying to avoid with this expansion. And think about the returning player experience coming back for this expansion. They already have to catch up on their legendary items and grind out new gear. Now we are telling them they also have to grind out a regional power system just to feel effective in the new zones. This really creates an incredible barrier to entry. On that note, if you are interested in these more philosophical thoughts, I have a whole mini-series called Endgame and LOTRO. While it is a bit old and outdated, the core arguments are actually just as relevant today as they were back then. Also, while here, if you are enjoying the content, consider becoming a channel member. The support goes a long way for videos just like this one. For survival instincts though, the developers clearly recognize that players want new ways to progress and feel powerful, and I do commend them for trying to deliver that, but I just don't believe that the solution is another system on top of LOTRO's mini systems. The core progression systems, the ones we take with us to every single zone, instance, and delving, those are the ones that need to be streamlined and respected before layering zone-specific borrowed power on top. At this point, we've already taken a step back and looked at LOTRO's progression broadly, but what if we go one step farther back? I've brought this up in several videos, but what if instead of so much vertical progression, LOTRO had more horizontal progression? With that, the developers could give us new ways to grow our characters without adding to the endless vertical treadmill. And there really are endless ways that horizontal progression could be implemented, but essentially with this kind of progression system, numbers aren't constantly pushed higher. Horizontal progression offers utility, unique non-combat ability skills, and situational builds that don't directly inflate raw power. While I haven't played a lot of Guild Wars 2, it's always coming up as the gold standard here. When you unlock a mastery in that game, it doesn't just make your character stronger, it unlocks account-wide benefits such as gliding and mounts. It fundamentally changes how you interact with the world, and perhaps more importantly, you get to keep that utility no matter what zone you travel to next. The Elder Scrolls Online also leans heavily into this with systems that respect the player's time. Because gear scales to a flat cap, new expansions focus on offering different set bonuses and situational builds rather than instantly making your old gear obsolete. Now, it is easy for me to say that I like the idea of horizontal progression being introduced to LOTRO, but the game is nearly 20 years old. It is practically impossible to rework the entire game to be horizontal, but it is much more practical to limit the rampant vertical progression, endless grind, and introduce horizontal systems. In a way, War Steeds almost function like this once you get past all the mounted combat enemies at least. This is a new way to navigate the landscape, and you can still mount it to swiftly travel through the world of Middle-earth across every update. Making more purposefully designed horizontal systems would feel like a genuine investment into the future of LOTRO. It would also respect the time we put into our characters instead of making old things obsolete with new updates. By contrast, borrowed power systems inherently do not respect the time that we put into our characters because they are built to be discarded. Again, survival instincts are technically different but functionally similar. There is also time for the developers to change course by time the expansion launches though. Ultimately, with Wolves of Mordor being my first expansion launch since Umbar, I am genuinely looking forward to experiencing it. With the change of setting, I am interested in the story direction and perhaps most of all just seeing the new landscapes. With LOTRO's endgame stuck in the same loop for the past few years with no fixing of the fundamental blow, I'm not sure how much I will get to that. While Survival Instinct sounds like it could have some cool things to change the pace of play, it doesn't really help any of the core systems that have been built up in LOTRO's long tenure. That's enough for me though. What about you? I am interested to hear from anybody that plays LOTRO, but especially if you played the past couple expansions. What do you think of progression in general and the upcoming survival instinct system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more, and thank you to my channel members for your continued support, and finally, thanks for watching everyone.